Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, Sunday mornings, and then repeated again on Sunday afternoon. And at Sunday afternoon at 4:30, you'll get to see the old episode from last week again. These episodes are also all at my site. That's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. You'll find Wichita Liberty TV there, show notes for each episode, and other material that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So, today our guest is Judge Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith is a judge in the 18th Judicial District. You know, you may get him to explain what exactly that means, but he was appointed by Governor Brown back in 2016 and then elected later again in that year. So, Judge Smith, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. And, you know, people talk about these judicial districts. What type of cases, or what is the 18th Judicial District? How about that?
Well, the 18th Judicial District covers Sedgwick County, and actually this is the largest district in the state of Kansas. We actually have 28 judges, 28 different divisions. I'm actually in Division 12. Right now I'm assigned to the juvenile court, and I just elected to stay on another 3 years so we can continue to do the good work we're doing there.
So the 18th District, it's a geographical district, but it just happens to be coincident with Sedgwick County.
That's exactly right.
Some districts are several counties or something like that. So the district court in general, what type of cases do they handle? What area of law is their jurisdiction?
18th Judicial District is a general jurisdiction district. So what that means is every single judge has the jurisdiction to hear any case, whether it's a criminal jury trial or family law cases. And in my case, I'm assigned a juvenile, but I still have jurisdiction to handle jury trials, for example, as well as any other areas of the law that the court may need help in. But
so when you say other areas of the law, do you mean civil and probate
civil,
too?
Probate, everything. Again, it's
so
a general
these are
jurisdiction.
The criminal cases, though, are violations of Kansas state law.
Right.
I mean, the city of Wichita has their courts for speeding tickets, and the federal courts have their courts. But so someone charged with murder on down to lots of different things could be in those courts there. But you have selected to work in juvenile justice. You've been talking quite a bit. You've written a number of columns in the Wichita Eagle about the problems in the juvenile justice, especially what would they call SINC, Child in Need of Care system. What are the problems, Judge Smith? What do we need to do to fix them?
How much time do we have?
Well, we've got about a little bit, 20 more, a little bit. But.
Well, I mean, obviously, the biggest caseload I have is, and our juvenile judges have, are child in need of care cases, which are the foster care cases. And they, obviously, they're potentially the most tragic, but at the same time, if they're handled properly, they can help make a huge difference in the lives of children that will eventually be adults. Simply stated, they're kids that are abandoned, kids that are physically abused, kids that are sexually abused, and ultimately the state moves in when they investigate these reports, and they will remove the children from their biological family, which is where the danger resides, and then they will place them in police protective custody, and then they'll be placed in foster care. And it's the job of the juvenile court judge, the child in need of care judge, to manage the case and make sure that the parents, if they're going to reintegrate, get the resources they need to be good parents. And if children have issues that need to be dealt with, for example, adverse childhood experiences that need therapy, things of that nature, it is the job of the juvenile court to make sure that the caseworkers and the parties that are involved in the case focus on the child's best interest to make sure that the child is protected both now and in the future in the event that they do reintegrate.
So a child ends up really through no fault of their own. I think in most cases it's the parents' fault, but the child just can't be with those parents anymore. Right. They end up maybe to a foster family. So a foster family is a family that's gone some training, is that right? And then acts as parents to that child for how long, maybe?
What varies, the average case length in Kansas for across the board, whether it's reintegration, adoption, or independent living, the average case length is 19.7 months. And that obviously factors in the 3-year case length for adoption cases and maybe the 18 to 24-month average for reintegration cases. So, and you have to factor in the fact that in Kansas, only about 30% of the kids are placed with relatives, which means Ideally, the other 70% would be placed with good, solid foster families that are able to meet their needs, at least on a temporary basis. So, but as far as the numbers that are in foster care, on average, last year we had about 11 in the entire Wichita region, which not only includes Sedgwick, but also surrounding areas. In the Wichita region, we had an average of about 1,200 out-of-home placements each month. This year, we're around 1,300 to 1,400 out-of-home placements. So you would assume that the 1,300 to 1,400 kids are either in relatives' homes, like grandparents, aunts and uncles, or with strangers' homes that are trained to be fosters.
And those are the traditional foster parents we hear about. So,
right, exactly.
Judge Smith, we're going to take a moment off for our first commercial break. When we come back, we'll have more about the foster care system here in Sedgwick County. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks, your host. We've got Carl Peterjohn, our co-host, and Judge Kevin Smith from the Sedgwick County District Court talking about juvenile justice. Carl?
Judge Smith, we talked in the first segment about foster care and the number of children in this general area, and understanding the borders aren't quite the same, but in terms of the total number of child in need of care, how many kids are we talking about? When I say kids, I'm talking about like infants up to age 18?
Now you're talking about just the ones that we've actually filed police protective custody cases on, sync cases on, or all the kids that are suspected to be victims of abuse?
Well, when we say, can we get both figures? I mean, I'm trying to get my hands on the overall numbers and help the viewers understand the size and dimension of the problem we're dealing with here, Judge.
Well, here's an example, and my numbers come from Sedgwick County.
Okay.
But an example, first of all, only about 4 to 5% of the cases that are investigated result in child in need of care cases being filed and result in kids being removed from their biological parents and placed in police protective custody. Last year, we had 583 cases filed in Sedgwick County. This year, for a while, we were on a pace to hit about 800, but it's leveled off quite a bit, and we'll probably end up at around 650 new cases.
Now, these are individual children or families?
These are kids, individual kids. So
Okay.
It's multiple, some of them have 2 kids, 1 kid, 5 kids. That's the total number of, actually that's the total number of kids. For every child, even though there's a child with, for example, 5 kids, each individual kid will have their own case number. So
Okay.
you could, in some cases, you have multiple fathers. So in some cases, you have some of the kids reintegrated with the father, and some of them multiple fathers. Some of them, all the kids reintegrate with the mom. So it varies as far as the reintegration timeline. In some cases, take a lot longer than others. And again, the average I mentioned before, we have about 1,300 to 1,400 out-of-home placements that are active in each given month. So
we're talking about with the children who are in the foster system and others who are tied in or maybe entering it soon. We're talking about you're talking about kind of the tip of the overall iceberg,
right.
In terms of problems. That just raises a broader question, Judge. Is the family dead? I mean, is the family structure in our country weakening? And dramatically so, or are there other factors at play that we ought to be talking about?
Well, I mean, I would say in my docket, most cases probably involve single parents, and many of those cases involved single parents with multiple fathers for that family of children. It's probably always been that way when it comes to foster care. You would probably have to talk to a family law judge and find out how many paternity actions they see filed in cases where kids aren't being removed from their homes. But again, it is a disturbing trend. I mean, what I'm seeing is I see a lot of these families that are overwhelmed because they don't have enough support at home. So I think there is something to that. There is something to the deterioration of the family.
So this might be a young, usually when we say single families, it's usually the mother, isn't it? Because they usually end up with the children, is that right?
often, but there are cases where single fathers
Single
are raising
fathers.
these kids.
So a single mother has, maybe one or two or three or more children, trying to work perhaps and do all those types of things. That's very difficult, isn't it, in most cases?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we see that every day.
Well, let me ask, you've asked about single mothers and also single fathers, but how about older grandparents raising children? Is that a growing trend in our community?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm very thankful for grandparents because very often that grandparents are our best source for kinship placements. And the data is very clear. It is certainly in a child's best interest for the child to be raised by a relative, specifically a grandparent or a relative that child already has contact with. And very often when these kids are placed with a grandparent, it's a grandparent that has had an ongoing relationship with the children. So grandparents are tremendous. I mean, I wish we had more grandparents that were in a position to raise these kids instead of potentially having to place them in either a stranger's home or place them back with a parent who has a history of
who
abuse,
isn't
for
able to
example.
take care of things?
Right.
Well, let me ask you, of the placements here in Sedgwick County or in kind of our region in south central Kansas, do you have any idea how many grandparents or who are acting basically in this role?
I don't know that number, but I do know that, again, we have about 30% of these kids that are in foster care that are placed with relatives. And when these case plans change to adoption, roughly half, right at 50%, are ultimately adopted by relatives. So whether that's grandparents, and I see a lot of grandparents adopt their grandchildren, or
Aunts
whether
or uncles
or aunts or uncles, right. So about half end up adopting these children, and most of the grandparents that I've dealt with allow the parents who've had their rights terminated for the adoption to continue to have the relationship with the kids. And that's obviously beneficial as long as those parents do deal with those underlying issues.
Let's take another moment for a commercial break. We'll be back with more Wichita Liberty TV in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks with Carl Peter John and our judge, Kevin Smith, of working with juvenile justice. So Judge Smith, what are the problems that people like me or Carl or just the people watching us, how could they get involved and be a positive force in the juvenile system somehow?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. In these cases, and the way to look at these cases are, obviously these kids are potentially in danger. They're potentially their potential data point, and not a good data point. So the way I look at it, this might be an opportunity. If we have a situation where these kids are subject to abuse, subject to abandonment, subject to mistreatment, there's a limited opportunity for us to place them with, for example, a solid foster family that can take care of them and show them and give them an example to follow when they become parents, for example. So the first thing a citizen can do is consider being a foster parent. Now that's a big commitment. That's a 24/7 commitment. And I will tell you, if you're not specifically led to do that, and if you're not prepared for that situation, it might not be a good idea for you to do that, because it's better to not foster than to foster and disrupt at the first sign of behavior issues with these children. Because a lot of these children, they are going to have some behavior issues. So it's important for you to be very patient if you become a foster. So that's the first thing. And the most time-consuming thing someone can do. And we have several organizations. The organizations I deal with the most are, of course, St. Francis Ministries, also Ember Hope. They deal with adoption and foster care services. We have DECA here, we have KVC, and we also have the Salvation Army. And those are just a few of the agencies. We have approximately 30 agencies, private organizations throughout Kansas that do train fosters. Those are the ones that we work with the most.
You mentioned adoption. If I can jump in, excuse me, Bob. How many kids coming out of the foster care system would end up getting adopted into families here in south central Kansas in the course of any given year? One of the things I most enjoyed when I was on the county commission was every November they would have an adoption ceremony down at
Right. We just had that.
downtown and just
November
had it last
17th,
month.
in fact.
At
And
Exploration Place, was it?
Yes.
an exploration place, and I was curious in terms of is that a tiny piece of the pie, or is it a significant number?
You're looking at about 20% of the foster cases that ultimately end up adoption case plans and actually proceed to adoption. So it's not the bulk, but it is a fairly substantial number.
So foster parenting is a pretty big commitment. I imagine adoption's even bigger than that. But
Right, for life. It's
Yeah.
life.
So for people who just aren't able to foster for whatever reason, are there other things still?
Yes, and some, if you look at the data, potentially more impactful things. For example, we have the ability in Sedgwick County to appoint what's called a court-appointed special advocate volunteer to a case. It's a citizen who is trained how to watch a case, keep an eye on things. They actually interview the child, they interview the foster parents and different parties that are involved.
And that's the CASA system.
CASA.
Yeah.
That's the CASA system.
Court-appointed special advocate.
Right,
Okay.
and here in Sedgwick County, it's CASA of Sedgwick County. They recruit and train the CASAs that we have. And this is a pretty impactful, first of all, the foundation is a good foster family. So let's be clear about that. You have to have a good foundation. Once you get that foundation, though, some interesting data points are, on average, foster kids graduate high school approximately 50% of the time. When they have a court-appointed special advocate, and in the past that's only been the problem kids where cases are going south, and then you appoint a CASA after some situations have already happened.
To the most problematic cases first.
Usually. And even with that though, when they have CASAs, over 80% of the children graduate high school.
So that's about the same rate, I think, as the general population, I think. more or
USD
less.
259 is 73%.
Okay.
So with the CASA, foster kids graduate higher than USD 259, for example. There's also a much lower recidivism rate. Over the life of the child, it's around 2% go back into foster care. Our DCF only tracks the 12-month recidivism rate. Without CASAs, that number is around 6.7%. That's in 12 months.
So recidivism in this case would be going back to their biological parents, but then having to be withdrawn again?
Exactly. So even that number, it's 2% lifetime versus 6.7% within 12 months. So it's a big impact. Runaway rates is another good example. I think right now, because of the latest sting operations, we actually have about 60 runaways in Kansas right now. 28 of those are in the Wichita region. But for CASAs in the last 5 years, they've had 5 kids that had CASAs that ran away, and they found them all, every single one of those kids, because the CASA had that relationship. So I think that's the biggest impact. A CASA follows the child from the very beginning to the very end, so these kids see somebody who's committed. So that's a big factor. Plus, they are actually letting me know, the judge know, who is doing their job and who is not, that's dealing with these children, and we can help hold everyone accountable, including the judge. So I love CASAs. I'm trying to appoint CASAs at temporary custody for every case, but we just don't have enough volunteers to be CASAs.
Well, let's take our last commercial break here, and when we come back, tell us, Judge Smith, more about what it takes to be a CASA. I imagine there has to be some training or something, and we'll just learn about that. So we'll be back in just a moment. Well, welcome here to our last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for today. Bob Weeks and Carl Peter John. Judge Kevin Smith is our guest today. So, mentioned briefly earlier about CASA, the court-appointed special advocates. That's a way people can get involved, but at a lower commitment than being a foster parent.
Right, and to be clear, I don't represent CASA. I'm with the 18th Judicial District. But again, we only have one option for court-appointed special advocate, that is CASA of Sedgwick County. And as far as being a CASA, and the remarkable thing about it is, first of all, you have to consider, for example, the guardian ad litem, that's the attorney who represents the child. The guardian ad litem has about probably 50 to 75 cases. Obviously, the district attorney's office has hundreds of cases. You have the appearance attorney that have dozens and dozens of cases. So for a CASA, they actually, as far as a time commitment, they only put in between 5 to 10 hours per case. per month. But because they have one child or one family of children, that 5 to 10 hours dwarfs the time that all the other parties that are involved in these cases have to give to these kids. So it has a pretty substantial impact. So as far as a time commitment, it's 5 to 10 hours versus being a foster, obviously, which is a 24/7 commitment.
Let me ask you, besides being a foster parent or a CASA, is there any other way that the average citizen can try and assist or participate in trying to help any of these children without being, I guess, obviously school teachers and people who are involved in the educational process would be involved, but any other way?
Sure. There's one other option that we have, and this is actually paid for by DCF. We have an organization that just moved into Sedgwick called You Thrive. And they actually mentor kids that are aging out, that are on a track to independent living. And they're a little more active than CASAs. They're more like a big brother and big sister. They'll help kids that are 17 on up get a driver's license, apply for jobs, apply for school, things of that nature. So it's a little more active. So it's a really good program we have available, and again, people in Sedgwick County now have the option to provide
All sorts of other things too, like we have a friend who's involved in the League 42, so that's a baseball program aimed at inner city youth, and now there's this First Tee golf program. Those types of things can be helpful too, I think, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they have to have involvement like that in the community. It's sports, other academic programs, music, all those types of endeavors, help them to get the focus away from what they've lacked and get their focus on the potential that they have, and we really like to see that in our courts.
Let me ask you, in terms of the age of the kids and the child in need of care, Judge, are we talking about more younger kids, or are we talking about more older kids, or the ratio in terms of the age of the children who are involved in the system is pretty stable and has been, say, for the last few years, or has it changed?
Well, I think most of the kids are under 10. The vast majority of the kids are under 10. Once you get above 10, of course, you have kids. When you reach that point, especially when they've been in the system for more than a year, more of these cases go toward the adoption track. And once they adopt, of course, the case is closed. And then you have some hard cases, kids that have some behavioral issues, some that might have some healthcare issues that take a lot more of a commitment than a regular healthy child. And for those kids, very often they go to independent living and a permanent custodianship track where they're going to be in the system until they age out. So those are a lot less.
And then we're talking, I probably should have clarified more that we're talking about children in need of care versus, what would be the traditional historic juvenile kids who've gotten in trouble with the law or juvenile delinquents. They're on a completely separate, and that's not what
But
we're
I'm still talking about foster care.
Okay.
I mean, you have a family with 4 or 5 kids. You may have kids ranging from newborn all the way up to 12 or 13 years of age. So we have kids all the way up to 18. And again, for those, very often they go into, when they're 18, they age out.
Sure.
But up to 18, they're on an independent living track. They reach a point where you can't find an adoption resource, so we try to find a permanent option for them. We get them on a track to graduate high school, to get their GED, to possibly apply to college. Some people don't realize this, but a person who ages out of our system, they actually get free tuition at Kansas universities.
Oh, really?
So if they're 18 when and they're still in the system, they can go to state schools, they can go to WSU Tech for technical training. They get free tuition. So, and there's quite a few kids that take advantage of that.
Well, there's free tuition at WSU Tech for juniors and seniors in high school in Kansas. I think it's Senate Bill 155 created that for all kids, but I think it's a huge opportunity for young people, and I don't mind giving it a plug right here. Is there any question we should have asked you that we haven't already in the very short time we have left?
We've got about a minute left or so.
Well, one thing I'll share, we need to get this message out. The fact is, this system is a long and drawn-out system. Kansas's numbers in foster care and the foster care system are fairly average compared to other states. But what we can do if we get involved in a community, if we get good families fostering, if we get good people serving as CASA mentors and Youth Thrive mentors, we can have a huge impact on these kids, and they don't have to know the system is messed up because they're with good people that care about them. So I would encourage anyone who's watching, call my office, 316-660-5612, talk to my administrative assistant, Kelsey Voss, and ask me to come to your church, your civic organization. I would like to share this story, let everyone know what we're dealing with and how they can help and make a big difference in the lives of these kids. And anytime, I'm ready to go.
And we've got your op-ed in the paper. We'll link to all of this in the show notes so people can have that as a reference too. So, well, Judge Smith, we're just out of time for today. Thanks so much for your time
Thank you.
on Wichita Liberty TV. And thank you, the viewer, and we'll be back next week.